She was considered a woman of great beauty, but also cruel and depraved. The dark legend surrounding her, amplified by the crimes attributed to her family, has followed her through the centuries, all the way to the present day. They said she was the daughter-in-law, and lover of Pope Alexander VI. And worse, they claim she was a notorious murderer who poisoned her victims. This last rumor gained strength through the works of great authors, such as the tragedy Lucrezia Borgia by Victor Hugo, later turned into an opera by Gaetano Donizetti. Today, we journey back to 15th century Rome, the golden age of the Italian Renaissance, to uncover the story of a woman born into a powerful family, a family that supported some of the most magnificent works of art in the world, but is also remembered as one of the most malevolent and mysterious dynasties in history, the Borgia family. And in today's video, Lucrezia Borgia. She was born in Subiaco, Italy, on April 18, 1480, the third child of the Spanish cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, a man born in Valencia, Spain. Rodrigo, who would later become the Pope of the Catholic Church in 1492, taking the name Alexander VI, was a man of terrifying ambition. He would do anything to hold on to power, and that made him many enemies along the way. He was especially hated by the Italians, who saw him as a foreign lord ruling their lands, shamelessly, arrogantly, and without the slightest concern for appearances. His appetite for women was another defining trait, but we must remember, at the time, celibacy was not mandatory for cardinals. Rodrigo Borgia had at least 7 known children with more than one woman. His favorite, however, was Venosa Catanei, a noblewoman from Lombardy. She bore him 4 children, the only ones he ever acknowledged as his own, even though they were born out of wedlock: Giovanni, Cesare, Geoffrey, and his beloved Lucrezia. The young Borgias were deeply shaped by their Spanish heritage and maintained a strong bond with one another. Lucrezia, in particular, had a close relationship with Cesare. Between them, there was genuine affection and mutual loyalty, and they needed it, for the Borgia siblings were often looked down upon simply for being the children of a foreigner. This only strengthened their sense of unity. They preferred to hire Spanish relatives or countrymen to serve them, believing that only they could truly be trusted. Lucrezia was deeply loved by her father, who, according to some chroniclers, adored her extraordinarily. Her relationship with her mother, however, was always distant. In truth, Cardinal Borgia loved all his children intensely, and from an early age sought to secure the best possible futures for them. Because they were illegitimate, he believed it was best they not be raised by their mother, but instead under his own supervision and that of his family. As a child, Lucrezia was placed in the care of one of her father's cousins, Adriana, the widow of the nobleman Ludovico Orsini. The Orsini family were allies of Rodrigo Borgia, and at the age of 60, Rodrigo had taken a young lover, Giulia Farnese Orsini, who was just 14 years old. Giulia and Lucrezia developed a strong and lasting friendship. Under the care of Adriana, Lucrezia received a well-rounded education. She studied poetry, Spanish, French, Italian, and a bit of Latin. She dedicated herself to music, dance, and embroidery, and was taught to express herself with elegance and eloquence. At the age of 11, Lucrezia was betrothed twice to 2 Spanish suitors. At the time, her father, Cardinal Borgia, still envisioned a future for his children in Spain. In February 1491, the first chosen was Don Cherubino de Centelles, with a marriage contract that included a dowry of 30,000 Valencian tamber, divided partly in cash and partly in jewels. In this case, the dowry was meant for the bride. 2 months later, Rodrigo arranged a new marriage agreement with another Valencian, Gaspar de Procida, son of the Count of Aversa. However, in 1492, after Rodrigo became pope under the name Alexander VI, he broke off both engagements. Now as pope, he had the power to pursue marriages of far greater significance than those with minor Spanish nobles. His goal shifted. He now wanted to establish his daughter in Italy, forming powerful political alliances with the noble families there. At that time, strategic marriages among Italy's ruling dynasties were proliferating, and the Borgias seized the opportunity to consolidate their influence on the peninsula. They decided that the best course would be to marry Lucrezia into one of the most powerful families in Italy. Cardinal Ascanio Sforza suggested to the Pope the name of his nephew, Giovanni Sforza, the Lord of Pesaro, a 27-year-old with control over a papal fiefdom, as a suitable match for Lucrezia. Through this union, Alexander VI forged an alliance with the powerful Sforza family, seeking to resist the looming French invasion led by Charles VIII, which threatened the Kingdom of Naples. During this period, the Pope gifted Lucrezia a palace. Adriana Mila, the Pope's cousin, managed the household of her niece, while Giulia Farnese, his young mistress, served as Lucrezia's lady-in-waiting. The residence quickly became a lively social center, frequented by relatives, friends, courtiers, noblewomen, and emissaries from princely houses. On February 2, 1493, the proxy marriage between 12-year-old Lucrezia and 27-year-old Giovanni Sforza was formally celebrated. It wasn't until June 1493 that Giovanni arrived in Rome, and the future spouses met in person for the first time. On June 12th, the official religious wedding ceremony was held. Lucrezia's elegance and grace were widely praised by contemporary speakers, who described her as someone who moved so gently that she seemed to float. After the lavish banquet, Lucrezia was not led to the marital bed, as was customary. The Pope did not want the marriage to be consummated for at least 5 months. This may have been due to the bride's young age, or more likely, to preserve the option of annulling the union later, should political circumstances shift. Just as he had previously annulled, without hesitation, the 2 Spanish engagements he had arranged for Lucrezia, he would have no qualms about dissolving this one too, if a more advantageous alliance appeared. At the time, daughters were often used as tools for political alliances, and as we can see, Lucrezia Borgia is a more than perfect example of this. 1 month after the wedding, as a precaution during an epidemic that was spreading through the city, Giovanni Sforza, her husband, left Rome, and it remains unclear whether Lucrezia accompanied him. He returned before Christmas and spent the holidays with his wife. During that period, the Pope forged new alliances with the Aragonese of Naples through the marriage of his youngest son, Cesare Borgia, to Sancha of Aragon, as Pope Alexander VI continued to face the claims of Charles VIII of France over Neapolitan lands. After a few months, Lucrezia traveled with her husband to the city of Pesaro, accompanied by Adriana and Giulia, who were responsible for taking care of her. Upon her arrival in Pesaro on June 8th, the local nobility warmly welcomed the new countess. Lucrezia enjoyed herself greatly in her new surroundings, to the point of forgetting to write her father regularly. When Charles VIII invaded Italy, Lucrezia remained safe in her husband's lands. Alexander VI, through clever diplomacy and flattery, avoided being affected by the French invasion, and later formed a holy league against France. The coalition army eventually defeated the French at the Battle of Fornovo. Lucrezia returned to Rome after Easter of 1495, as her husband's position grew increasingly precarious. By that point, the Borgia family no longer needed the Sforzas, and Giovanni Sforza's presence at the papal court became unnecessary. The Pope was now pursuing newer, more advantageous political alliances, and may have even secretly ordered Giovanni's assassination. The widely accepted version suggests that Lucrezia was warned of this by her brother Cesare, and in turn alerted her husband, who fled Rome on March 26, 1497. Pope Alexander VI commanded his son-in-law to return to Rome, but Sforza repeatedly refused. Eventually, he learned that the Pope intended to dissolve the marriage. To obtain the annulment, the Pope claimed the marriage was invalid because Sforza was impotent and had never consummated the union. Thus, the annulment proceedings began. Giovanni Sforza, Lucrezia's husband, felt deeply humiliated and insulted, and this is where one of the most infamous Borgia legends was born. Sforza shouted to the four winds that the Pope was his own daughter's lover. According to some sources, he even offered to prove that he was not impotent by performing a public consummation test in front of witnesses. But the offer was rejected. Lucrezia sought refuge in the convent of San Sisto, trying to escape the scandal surrounding her marriage. And in the summer of that same year, around mid-June, a tragedy struck that would shake the Borgia family to its core. The mutilated body of a handsome young man was found floating in the Tiber River. His name was Giovanni Borgia. Finding a corpse in the Tiber was not unusual. The river was often used as a grim dumping ground for vigilante justice. What made this case exceptional was the identity of the victim. He was none other than the Pope's favorite son. The mystery of his murder still baffles investigators to this day. No one knows for certain whether it was an act of retaliation, a revenge against the brutal rule of the Pope, carried out by the many enemies he had, or if it was a direct enemy of Giovanni Borgia himself. Some say Giovanni was an arrogant and temperamental young man. One account tells of him ordering the execution of a guest at a dinner simply because the man had unintentionally insulted him. He and his father had many enemies. But the truth might be even darker. Some believe the assassin was much closer, his very own brother, Cesare. It is well known that Cesare was consumed with jealousy and resentment toward his brother, who had always been their father's favorite. To make matters worse, Pope Alexander VI had appointed Giovanni as general of the papal army, a position Cesare had desperately wanted for himself. Instead, he was forced into the role of cardinal. When news of his son's murder reached him, the Pope fell into deep mourning and sorrow, and despite having every resource and power at his disposal, justice was never served. To this day, the killer was never found or punished. The most likely explanation? Alexander VI either could not or would not punish his other beloved son, Cesare. Lucrezia received news of her brother Giovanni's death while she was still living in the convent. Soon afterward, the Sforza family withdrew all support from Giovanni Sforza, fearing the Pope's wrath due to his delay in accepting the annulment. Left with no choice, Sforza signed a formal declaration of impotence and the annulment documents in the presence of witnesses on November 18, 1497. Lucrezia confirmed her father's claims before the ecclesiastical judges, who, satisfied with her testimony, declared her a virgin and untouched, without even conducting a physical examination. But the scandal surrounding the annulment came at a heavy cost to Lucrezia's reputation. Few believed that Giovanni Sforza was truly impotent. Even fewer believed that Lucrezia had remained a virgin. And worse still, the accusations of incest within the Borgia family began to circulate widely. Many accounts suggested she was not only her father's lover, but also her brother Cesare's. Only a few months later, Lucrezia became entangled in yet another scandal. On February 14, 1498, the body of a young Spanish servant named Pedro Calderón, a favorite of the Pope, was found floating in the Tiber River. Some reports claim that the body of one of Lucrezia's ladies-in-waiting, named Pantasilea, was found beside his. Many historians have pointed to Cesare as the instigator of the double murder, believing it was motivated by his jealousy, possibly because Lucrezia had engaged in a romantic affair while staying at the convent and may have become pregnant by the young Spaniard. The case, however, was hushed up, so as not to interfere with the new marriage plans her father was already putting into motion. There is strong evidence suggesting that Lucrezia gave birth to a child during her time at the convent, but little is known about the baby. Some historians believe this child was none other than Giovanni Borgia, born around that time, a child Lucrezia always treated with deep affection. When Lucrezia left the convent and returned to her residence, the negotiations for her second marriage had already been finalized. With a dowry set at 40,000 gold ducats, she was to marry Alfonso of Aragon, the illegitimate son of Alfonso II of Naples and brother of Sancha, who was married to her own brother Geoffrey. The marriage was arranged by the Pope and by Cesare, who had by then left the clergy and taken command of the papal army, following the murder of his brother. Their goal was to bring the Borgia family even closer to the Neapolitan throne. The wedding took place on July 21st, 1498, in the presence of a few close friends. Lucrezia soon fell deeply in love with her husband, a 17-year-old young man. She was 18. She had already heard much about him, as her sister-in-law Sancha had spoken of him often and always with praise. Contemporaries agreed that he was the most beautiful teenager ever seen in Rome. In the months that followed, the couple lived in love and peace, maintaining a splendid court. They welcomed poets and scholars from the Roman Academy, as well as prominent artists of Rome, including Michelangelo. On February 9, 1499, Lucrezia suffered a miscarriage after a fall, but this loss did not discourage the couple. Just 2 months later, Lucrezia was pregnant again. Then came troubling news: the announcement of Cesare's marriage to Charlotte d'Albret. And there were very real reasons to worry. Both Alfonso, Lucrezia's husband, and Sancha, Joffre's wife, were alarmed by the news. They realized that the Borgia alliances had once again shifted direction. In the past, the Pope had aligned himself with the Kingdom of Naples to oppose the French. But now, with Cesare marrying into the French nobility, it was clear that the Borgias were throwing their support behind Louis XII, backing his plan to retake Milan and the Kingdom of Naples in exchange for Cesare's marriage. This deeply unsettled Alfonso, who fled the city, leaving his wife Lucrezia, 6 months pregnant, utterly heartbroken and desperate. Pope Alexander VI was furious. He banished Sancha from Rome and posted guards around Lucrezia's palace after learning that Alfonso had tried to persuade her to run away with him. Lucrezia and her brother, both once tied to the House of Naples through marriage, were now forced to abandon the interests of their adopted family and defend only those of the Borgia bloodline. Lucrezia begged her father to protect her husband. The Pope appeared deeply moved by her pleas and sent a messenger to assure Alfonso's safety. Within a month, the young couple was reunited, and Lucrezia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. In gratitude, she named him after her father. But the Pope may not have been so grateful in return. While the young mother rejoiced in her newborn son and cherished moments with her beloved husband, a hidden enemy was already plotting the end of her happiness. Historians have often pointed out that Alexander was a deeply treacherous man. No one knows for certain whether he truly intended to protect Alfonso or whether he was simply waiting for the right moment to strike. It is said that Alexander's possessive love for his daughter was the only true passion of his life. Many claimed at the time that seeing Lucrezia happy in another man's arms filled him with envy, longing, and a twisted jealousy. According to all accounts, Lucrezia and Alfonso continued to live in happiness until that fateful summer of 1500. After dining in their Vatican apartments, Alfonso announced that he would go out for a walk. As he exited St. Peter's, the holiest sanctuary, he was not surprised to see pilgrims sleeping on the steps. But then came the attack. From behind, deep wounds were inflicted around his neck and shoulders, and his clothes were soaked in his own blood. Alfonso was carried back inside the Vatican, and it seemed unlikely he would survive the night. When Lucrezia saw her husband in that condition, she fainted. Her father immediately arranged for 24-hour protection around Alfonso's chambers to prevent any further attempts from the mysterious assassins. Yet 6 weeks after the attack, someone managed to slip past the guards and strangled Alfonso in his sickbed. Lucrezia was devastated. She fell into constant mourning, signing her letters as the most unfortunate of women. Rumors, well-founded and persistent, spread throughout the papal court. They claimed that the killer was none other than the most trusted ally of Cesare. Now that Alfonso was dead, the long-desired alliance with France, championed by Cesare and Alexander, could move forward. Whether the murder had been carried out under papal orders or was the personal initiative of Cesare, remains uncertain. As for Lucrezia, the pressures of her family forced her to place blood ties above marriage and to silently accept the tragedy. All of Rome knew who had taken Alfonso's life, but with no official proof, the crime was accepted, and Lucrezia was expected to forget her husband. Lucrezia later received a marriage proposal from the Duke of Gravina, who had already been her suitor in 1498, but she rejected the offer, saying publicly and before witnesses, "Because my husbands are unfortunate." The truth is, at the time, many suitors still sought Lucrezia's hand, despite the dangers a man risked by marrying her. The Borgia name remained powerful, and many noble families hoped to secure ties to the papacy through her. Pope Alexander VI began new marriage negotiations, this time with Alfonso d'Este, son of Ercole, the Duke of Ferrara. The aim was to strengthen Cesare's position in the Romagna. Through this union, Lucrezia would become part of one of the oldest noble houses in Italy. However, the Este family showed hesitation, influenced by the many slanderous rumors that surrounded Lucrezia. In 1501, an event occurred that would only deepen the Borgias' sinful reputation. According to the notes of the papal secretary, a debauched gathering known as the Banquet of the Chestnuts was held. Cesare invited 50 courtesans and well-known prostitutes from Rome, along with noblemen and political allies. It was said that both the Pope and Lucrezia were in attendance. After dinner, it is alleged that an orgy took place, with everyone participating. Many historians, however, believe it's unlikely that the entire Borgia family was involved. The Pope was a shrewd man, and at that very moment he was deeply engaged in marriage negotiations with the Duchy of Ferrara. He knew he had to maintain appearances. It is highly doubtful that Pope Alexander VI would have risked those plans by allowing his daughter to attend such an event. At last, the marriage contract was signed in the Vatican on August 26, 1501, and the proxy marriage was performed in Ferrara on September 1st. It was agreed that Rodrigo, Lucrezia's son, would remain in Rome under the Pope's protection, allowing her to begin her new life in Ferrara, free from the shadow of her past. Whether she agreed to this arrangement or not remains unknown. Eventually, Lucrezia set out for Ferrara, where she would see her new husband for the first time. There, she also met her sister-in-law, Isabella d'Este. The rivalry between the two women would become legendary. Each vied for the role of leading lady in the Este court. At Torre Fossa, Lucrezia met Duke Ercole, the rest of the Este family, and the court of Ferrara. Finally, on February 2nd, the feast of the Purification of the Virgin, Lucrezia made her solemn entrance into Ferrara, greeted with great joy by the townspeople. After the warm welcome, Lucrezia and Alfonso retired to their chambers. According to reports, the marriage was consummated 3 times that night. She was 21 years old at the time. Following the grand celebrations, life at the Ferrara court returned to its usual rhythm. Lucrezia tried to adapt to her new environment, but soon tensions arose over the 10,000 ducat allowance granted to her by the Duke. Her discontent strained relations with the courtiers, who complained about her preference for Spanish and Roman ladies-in-waiting over those of Ferrara. In the spring, Lucrezia became pregnant. During the summer, an epidemic of fever swept through Ferrara, and Lucrezia was also infected. On September 5th, she suffered convulsions and gave birth to a stillborn baby girl. Despite the ordeal, she recovered and spent her convalescence at the Corpus Domini monastery. Both when she left and upon her return, Lucrezia was warmly welcomed by the people and received with respect by the courtiers. Cesare's military brilliance as commander of the papal army brought the Borgias to the peak of their power and notoriety, but also struck fear across the land. As a result, Lucrezia began to receive more consideration and respect from her husband's family. Her father-in-law, the Duke, increased her allowance, and since he was a widower, Lucrezia came to be known as the Duchess, taking on ceremonial roles in public events. But her life would change completely. After attending an informal dinner, Alexander and his son Cesare were both struck by a mysterious illness. For several days, they hovered on the brink of death. Cesare recovered, but Alexander, who was over 70, did not. The ghastly appearance of his corpse fueled rumors of poisoning. A gardener gave a detailed description of Alexander's condition after his death in 1503. His tongue dark purple and blackened, his body so swollen from poison that it had to be forced into the coffin. Pope Alexander VI, known for poisoning his enemies, died poisoned himself. Some even claimed it was a tragic accident, that the poison had been intended for a cardinal and ended up killing the Pope instead. To this day, the true cause of Alexander's death remains uncertain. Lucrezia received news of her father's death on August 18th. She entered deep mourning, although no member of her husband's family joined her in grief. Her position was now uncertain, and friends advised her not to display too much sorrow, to avoid suspicions that her despair was not only from her father's death, but also from fear of rejection by her husband. Lucrezia had not yet provided Alfonso with an heir, but still she had won the sympathy of the people of Ferrara and of her father-in-law, Duke Ercole. The downfall of the Borgia family worsened with the election of Pope Julius II, a declared enemy of the Borgias. Lucrezia became deeply worried about her son Rodrigo. Her father-in-law opposed the child's arrival in Ferrara and advised Lucrezia to send him to Spain, but she refused, entrusting the boy instead to her father's relatives. Cesare, after being captured by order of Julius II, partially agreed to papal demands in exchange for his freedom. Yet as soon as he was released, he fled to Naples, where he was once again imprisoned. Lucrezia's father-in-law died on January 25, 1505, and the very next day, her husband Alfonso was crowned duke. On September 19, 1505, in Reggio, Lucrezia gave birth to a son named Alessandro. But the child was frail and tragically died only a month later. This loss deeply grieved Lucrezia, marking the second time she had failed to provide the Este family with an heir. At the end of 1506, Cesare Borgia managed to escape from prison. Rejoicing in her brother's freedom, Lucrezia celebrated the carnival of 1507 with joy, but during this time, she suffered a miscarriage. Her husband Alfonso did not hide his displeasure. He blamed Lucrezia for the misfortune, claiming that it may have been caused by her habit of wearing high heels, walking too quickly, riding in uncomfortable carriages, and perhaps even from her occasional use of makeup. In April of that same year, the news of Cesare Borgia's death reached Ferrara. Upon hearing it, Lucrezia showed remarkable self-control and strength, remarking, "The more I try to resign myself to God, the more troubles befall me." Yet that night, her ladies-in-waiting heard her weeping inconsolably in her chamber. Cesare, a man of extreme violence, met a violent end himself. He was killed by blows from an axe. To honor her brother's memory, Lucrezia commissioned a funeral hymn, portraying him as a hero sent by divine providence to unify the Italian peninsula. In the summer of 1507, Lucrezia became pregnant again, but once more had to endure the loss of a potential heir. However, in April of the following year, 1508, she gave birth to Ercole II, a healthy and robust child. Lucrezia recovered quickly from childbirth, and most importantly, she had fulfilled her duty of providing an heir to the Duchy of Ferrara. After the birth of his heir, her husband began to appreciate her much more. He placed great trust in her and admired her abilities as a ruler. He often consulted her on political and administrative matters, even entrusting her with the full responsibility of governing the duchy during his travels. In 1512, Lucrezia received the heartbreaking news of the death of her son Rodrigo, who had remained in Rome. Despite the distance, Lucrezia had always cared deeply for him. and his death left her devastated. She sought refuge for a month in the convent of San Bernardino. There, Lucrezia underwent a profound transformation. She became deeply drawn to spiritual devotion, abandoned low-cut gowns, attended church services regularly throughout the city, and listened to religious readings during her meals. Eventually, she joined the Third Order of St. Francis. In 1515, she gave birth to a daughter, Eleonora, and in 1516, a son named Francesco. The many pregnancies, alternating with miscarriages, greatly weakened her physically. On June 14, 1519, she gave birth to another daughter, Isabella Maria, but soon fell ill with puerperal fever. Her hair was cut in an attempt to ease her suffering. At last, she signed her will in the presence of her husband, declaring before losing consciousness, "I will belong to God forever." Lucrezia died on June 24, 1519, at the age of 39, leaving her family and the entire city in deep mourning. She had fully adapted to life in Ferrara and became a true patron of the arts. Over the years, Lucrezia won the affection of the people of Ferrara, and by the end of her life, she was known as the Mother of the People. The daughter of Pope Alexander VI was accused of every kind of atrocity over the centuries, including the notorious rumor that she owned a hollow ring designed to carry poison and discreetly pour it into an unfortunate victim's cup. Today, however, many historians believe this reputation is more myth than truth, crafted by the many ruthless enemies her father and brothers made. Lucrezia simply obeyed, adapted, and survived. And perhaps she was one of the most slandered women in all of history. She was buried in the monastery of Corpus Domini, wearing the habit of a Franciscan tertiary.